Deep in the mysterious Everglades, officers uncover something no one was meant to see. A sunken submarine, two lost brothers, and a truth long buried beneath the swamp. Stay tuned to discover the hidden story of the Delgado brothers. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and tell us in the comments where you're watching from. The Everglades stretched out endlessly beneath the heavy Florida sun, a tangled mosaic of water and wilderness where the line between land and swamp blurred into one. Humid air clung to every surface, thick with the earthy scent of decay and life all at once. Dragonflies buzzed in lazy circles over dark water, and hidden herons stirred in the reeds. Here, the world seemed unchanged, untouched by time. But today, something waited beneath the still surface, quietly disrupting the ancient calm. Officer Linda Clark guided the patrol boat slowly through a narrow channel, the low hum of the engine cutting through the swamp's song. Her shirt clung to her back, drenched in sweat. She wiped her forehead and squinted into the glare reflected off the water. Beside her, Sergeant Thomas Reed scanned the horizon through a pair of battered binoculars. They had been out for hours, checking for illegal traps and signs of lost hikers. Nothing unusual, until now. Without warning, a faint metallic glimmer caught Linda's eye beneath a patch of floating lilies. "Tom," she said, voice steady but sharp, "do you see that?" Reed lowered the binoculars and leaned forward. The water rippled slightly, and for a moment the light flickered once more. Unnatural, unmistakable. "I see it," he muttered. He stood, bracing himself against the side of the boat. "That's not just trash." Linda eased back on the throttle, bringing the patrol boat to a slow crawl. The mirrored surface parted as they drifted closer. What they saw beneath sent a chill through both of them. A curved object partly concealed by mud and weeds. Metal, smooth, solid, and deliberate. Reed grabbed a metal pole and reached down, pressing the tip against the object. A faint, hollow ring sounded back. Too clean, too intentional. "That's no junk," he said. Linda's jaw tightened. She reached for her radio. "Base, this is Unit 3. We've got something submerged here. Possible hazard. Request backup and a dive team." She clipped the radio back and stared at the shape under the water. The longer she looked, the clearer it became. A rounded hull, welded seams. Not a boat, not a car, something else, something hidden. The swamp seemed to breathe around them as they waited. Alive, alert, holding its secrets close. Clouds gathered overhead, muting the light. Within the hour, a secondary unit arrived, followed by a team of divers with portable gear. Their voices were hushed, movements purposeful. One by one, they dropped into the murky water, disappearing beneath the surface. Minutes crawled by. Then a diver surfaced, his expression drained of color. "It's a sub," he gasped. "A damn submarine." Linda and Reed exchanged a look, equal parts disbelief and dread. A submarine buried in the middle of the Everglades. It made no sense. And yet, there it was. The recovery operation started immediately. Winches groaned as the cables tightened. Mud and roots strained against metal. Bit by bit, the object broke free, rising from the dark water like some forgotten relic. Covered in algae, rust, and the grime of years spent underwater, it was small, no more than 20 feet long. Crude welding scars marked its surface. Most terrifying of all, it looked hand-built. Linda circled it slowly, her boots sinking into the wet earth. Something about it felt wrong. Not just illegal, personal. The kind of project someone forged with urgency, maybe fear. The kind they hoped would never be found. The hatch was sealed shut, rusted edges fused together. They tried crowbars first, then heavier tools. Sparks burst through the twilight air as cutters bit into the corroded metal. Linda kept her distance, watching, the unease in her gut growing stronger with each passing second. It wasn't just a vessel. It was a tomb. The final lock snapped with a piercing shriek. The hatch cracked open. A stale, rotten air oozed out, thick, suffocating, stagnant with years of silence. Reed stepped back, covering his mouth. Linda lifted her flashlight and leaned in. "Not tonight," Reed said quietly. "We'll go in at first light." Linda didn't argue. She took one last look at the gaping black hatch. The Everglades had finally surrendered one of its secrets, but whatever was waiting inside, she wasn't sure she wanted to know. Morning arrived in a gauze of mist, softening the world into pale outlines and wet breath. The swamp moved in muffled rhythms, distant wing beats, a ripple across flat water, the delicate click of insects booting up for the day. The submarine sat on a tarp by the shore, filth-slick and patient, its opened hatch like a wound that had clotted in the night. Linda Clark stood with a paper cup of coffee, cooling in her hand, and watched the mist lift off the hull. Sleep had been a rumor. She had left the scene the night before, but the dark space behind that hatch followed her home and settled in every corner of her room. Now, with the light coming up and the air thick with fuel and wet metal, the dread felt sharper because it had shape. Reed arrived with a nod that passed for good morning and a second cup of coffee he set on the patrol boat's console. "Let's finish it," he said, voice low, "before the sun breaks this haze and draws every mosquito and rumor in the county." Forensics unpacked their cases. Cameras flashed, evidence bags rustled. A diver from the night team, still smelling faintly of the water he'd slept in, climbed the short ladder and leaned in with a headlamp. "Air's cleared some," he said, and no one looked reassured. Linda went up first. The ladder flexed under her boots. She steadied herself on the hatch ring, steel cold despite the heat, and aimed her light inside. The beam cut through shadow and suspended dust, revealing a cramped interior welded from mismatched plates. Pipes snaked along the bulkheads. A tangle of instruments, boat parts cannibalized into something that wanted to be a control panel, crowded the front. The floor glistened with the thin sheen of standing water and green film. She moved the beam left and froze. Two shapes slumped along the far wall, strapped by inertia more than belts. One figure was seated near the jury-rigged controls, chin pitched to chest. The other lay crooked beside the hatch, one arm extended toward the seals as if the reach had been interrupted by a final, absolute decision from the water. "Bodies," Linda said, and her voice sounded too small in the open morning. She held still a second longer, as if movement might disturb the somber geometry of the scene. Then she climbed down. Reed went up, looked once, and descended in silence. "Document everything," he told the team, slow and steady. No heroics. They worked with ordinary reverence, photos, measurements, the gentle lift of objects from silt to plastic sleeves. The coroner's assistants moved with the practiced tenderness of people who spend their days between the last moment and what comes after. It didn't matter that the men had been dead for years. The care was the same. When the first body came out, the heat shifted. A small wind pressed the cattails into a single direction, as if the swamp itself bowed. The man from the controls was older, or had been. The sealed environment had preserved and ruined in equal measure. His clothing clung in damp tatters. A cheap plastic lanyard was fused to his collar. They eased him onto a gurney and covered him gently. The second body followed, lighter, bones answering gravity with a click. He had been close to escape, close to the hatch, close to something. Linda stared at his hand, fingers half curled, as if still negotiating a bargain that never closed. Inside, more details waited. Linda climbed back up after the removals. The smell was worse now that the air moved. She kept her breathing shallow and took inventory with her light. On the floor by the hatch lay several waterproof packages with faded export stamps. One had torn along a seam when it was lifted. The interior was chalk white and compact, the kind of white that meant headlines and trials. An agent slid another open with a practiced blade and closed it again with the same care you might give an heirloom. "Cocaine," he said. Nobody looked surprised. The word settled with the dust. At the front, the control cluster told the story of someone who had spent their life coddling engines. Wires were bundled with tape and hope. Switches had been labeled in cramped print that water had turned to ghosts. A small intake pipe ran to a valve assembly near the port side bulkhead, its fittings corroded into a single sculpture by time. Linda crouched and angled her light. The coupling had split hairline to jagged, a failure that started so small it almost didn't exist until it meant everything. "See that?" she called down. One of the techs climbed up beside her, followed her beam and exhaled through his teeth. Intake cracked. Pressure blows, oxygen drops, humidity climbs, and you're done. Once they lost positive pressure, the hatch might as well have been welded shut from inside. "It was," Linda said quietly, running a gloved finger along the seam of the hatch ring. "At least, by panic." Near the foot controls, something glossy flashed beneath the slime. She reached in and pinched it free. A small photograph sealed in a fogged plastic sleeve. A little girl with pigtails smiled into sunshine, the cheap camera's flare caught in one eye. The corners were rounded by handling, the plastic abraded to milk where fingers had held it many, many times. Linda held it a moment longer than she meant to. Down by the bilge line, a brown leather shape slouched into muck. She pried it loose, a wallet swollen by years of water and silence. Inside were 2 IDs, stuck together like pages of a damp book. She separated them by breath and patience. Florida licenses. Photos faded but legible. Brothers if the bones and eyes told truth. Michael Delgado, Anthony Delgado. Miami addresses, both long past. She passed the wallet down. Reed took it, looked, and ran a thumb over the plastic as if it might warm back to life under skin. He didn't speak. Toward the hatch, where the second man had fallen, a curl of paper clung to the floor with the stubbornness of soaked things. Linda teased it up, rolled over its weight, and felt it give with a wet sigh. It was folded once, twice, and sealed by silt. She opened it slowly. The handwriting lurched across the page, the letters heavy at the start and wobbling toward the end. Water had bruised the ink into continents, but the meaning survived. "If anyone finds this, forgive us. The engine failed. We tried to surface. Tell my daughter Emily I love her." The signature bled into anonymity, but the first stroke was strong. Monsieur Linda's throat tightened in a way that no technique could help. She sealed the note in a bag and wrote on the label with hands that had suddenly remembered they belonged to a person. By mid-morning, the mist had burned off and the day came on hard. Dew died on grass. Mosquitoes found every exposed inch. A local reporter called the precinct's front desk. Some rumor about a drug sub in the swamp. And Reed stepped away to build a wall out of phrases like ongoing investigation and no comment at this time. He returned with the look of a man who'd diverted water for an hour and knows the river will still run. "Get the packages logged," he told the agents. "Hull goes to the impound hangar. Forensics will want a week. We'll give them 2 days." He paused, eyes on the hatch, as if the absence of the 2 men glowed as brightly as their presence had. "And bag that intake assembly for the lab." They worked faster after that. A flatbed rolled into the clearing and sank an inch in the mud before it found its footing. Cables sang. The sub rose. For a second, the sun caught along its curve and Linda saw what she had seen from the boat yesterday, a glint beneath lilies that had tried to pretend the past was gone. She followed the evidence table back to its end, to the small pile that didn't scream felony, the wallet, the photograph, a cheap keychain with a dingy plastic buoy, and the bagged note. She picked up the photo again and tried to calculate the years between the girl in the picture and the world she would have grown into without the man who had kept her face in his pocket. Reed stepped beside her. "Anything else in there?" "A lot of bad guesses," Linda said. She tapped the intake in its bagged harness. "And one answer." He nodded, reading the labels she had written. The names, the city. "Delgado," he said, like testing for taste. "Mechanics by the look of it. Not much cartel chic." "No," she agreed. "More sweat than luxury." The coroner's van doors shut with a hollow finality that nudged the morning toward afternoon. The agents taped the last bag and copied the last number into the chain of custody log. Someone shouted for the ramp. The flatbed groaned into motion, dragging the swamp's secret toward a brighter, harsher light. Linda watched it go and felt a sensation she had known before. The moment a place returns to being only a place after it has been a crime scene. The birds sounded the same. The water wrinkled the same. But a new silence hung between the reeds, a ledger line where names had been written in and then crossed out. Reed broke it. "We'll run the IDS, check missing persons, arrest records, DMV. See if anyone's been looking for them or stopped looking." "I'll write it up," Linda said. She slipped the photo of the girl into an evidence bag with the care of someone folding a shirt that wasn't hers. "And I want to know who taught them to build that thing." "Or who paid them to try," Reed said. He rubbed his jaw with 2 fingers and looked out across the long green. "Either way, you don't weld your way into that without a reason." The flatbed crested the dirt road and vanished. The swamp exhaled and closed its mouth. They packed the last case and headed for the boat. Linda paused at the lip of the water and glanced back at the rectangle of trampled grass where the sub had rested. The imprint held the shape a few seconds longer, then began to smooth, as if the swamp had decided the memory belonged to it. On the ride back, wind gathered her hair, and the channel etched itself in quick flashes of light and shadow. Reed handled the wheel. The engine droned. Neither of them was eager to break the day into language. When the station finally rose out of the heat like a mirage pretending to be brick, Linda stepped onto the dock with legs that protested the land. Paperwork waited the way it always did, patient, insatiable. She carried the small evidence box herself, set it on her desk, and sat down, the chair creaking a tired greeting. She typed the first line of the report and stopped. The facts arranged themselves neatly. Location, time, weather, personnel. Discovery of 1 submersible vessel, length approximately 20 feet. Recovery of 2 deceased adult males. Controlled substance present, suspected cocaine. She kept to the language that made sense to courts and statistics. She wrote their names: Michael Delgado, Anthony Delgado. She wrote the word brothers, even though the report didn't strictly require it. She logged the wallet and the photograph and the note with its short, unstoppable plea to the future. She logged the cracked intake, the defective seal, the hard math of air gone and water won. She read the page twice and understood that it accounted for everything except what mattered. She added a final line anyway, small and plain. Items recovered suggest familial ties and personal motivation. It wasn't enough. It never was. But it pointed in the only direction that felt honest. When she looked up, Reed was in her doorway, one hand on the frame. "You coming to the lab later?" he asked. "Wouldn't miss it," she said. He nodded and left. Linda glanced at the photograph again through the plastic. The girl's smile was bright with the kind of future people bargain with. Linda set the photo back in the box, closed the lid, and let her hand rest there a moment. Outside, the afternoon heat reached its full argument, and the Everglades went on breathing, endless, indifferent, and, for a while, quiet. Inside, the story had started to move, not fast, but forward, and now it carried names. The Florida Wildlife Service headquarters was a short drive from the docks, but on days like this it felt farther than the edge of the state. The morning's salt-stained humidity had transitioned into a denser afternoon heat, the kind that made thoughts heavy and shirts cling. Linda Clark stepped into the building's cooled interior with a shudder that felt like guilt, for the comfort, not the chill. She headed straight for the records department with the evidence box tucked against her side. Inside it lay the 2 IDs, the wallet, the note, and the photograph, silent but insistent reminders that a mystery had become human. Reed was already there, a stack of printouts under one arm, leaning over the terminal of the public database system. "Got matches," he said without looking up. "Driver's licenses, old addresses, a few traffic tickets. One insurance claim for a busted radiator 10 years ago. Stuff you'd expect from guys who made their living on engines." Linda set the evidence box on the desk. "Anything after that?" "Blank," Reed said. "No arrests. No job records, no utility bills, like they drove off the grid." She pulled up a chair, logged into her workstation, and typed in the names manually. Michael Delgado, born March 1980, Anthony Delgado, born July 1984. The system loaded their profiles, stale data sealed in government fonts. Michael, formerly employed at a small auto body shop outside Miami. Married once, divorced. One child, Emily Delgado, born 2010. Anthony, listed as a contractor in marine engine repair. No children, no spouse on file, no listed next of kin except one older brother. After 2018, the timeline ended. No address, no trace, just silence. Linda scrolled through Michael's record again and stopped on the date of his last address. 3 months before their mother died, she murmured. They moved after that. Reed nodded. Probably fell behind on payments. Maybe the house got foreclosed. Hard to track someone who stops existing on paper and in the system, Linda finished, unless someone wants to look. Reed tapped the edge of the keyboard. Good news is, found one person who filed a missing person report. Not the cops. A leasing office in Miami. They said the brothers vacated a rental unit without notice. No forwarding address. He held up a form. Its ink scanned thinly as if the paper had resisted the copier. A building manager had filled it in 5 years ago. 2 lines pleading the question, "Have you seen these men?" They left behind a toolbox and 6 months of unpaid rent. "No follow-up?" Linda asked. "None." They closed the file. Probably wrote it off. Linda leaned back and rubbed her eyes. Somewhere behind the static of databases and timestamps, The truth was tangled between poverty, obligation, and a promise that got out of hand. "They didn't run," she said. "Not at first. Whatever they did, someone asked them to read nodded, or someone pushed them into it." She opened the evidence box and pulled out the photograph again. The girl, Emily, roughly 8 years old then, 14 now, if still alive and somewhere safe, her pigtails curled in the humid wind of some long-gone afternoon. Linda felt a tightness in her chest again, different from disgust, sharper than pity. "I want to find her," Linda said quietly. Reed didn't look surprised. "If she's still in the system, we can try tracking her through foster care logs. County records. It'll take time. Time we owe," Linda replied. Before she could say more, her office phone rang. She answered, placeholders already filling her mind. Lab reports, local news, someone complaining about gators in their yard. But the voice on the other end startled her into silence. "Officer Clark? This is Dr. Holloway, State Forensics. We processed that intake valve you sent over. Go ahead. We've got evidence of tool stress around the cracked seal. Pattern suggests improper torque. Someone over-tightened. Metal fractured from repeated pressure cycles. It wasn't designed to hold that load. Linda processed the information. So, it wasn't just defective. It was rushed. Exactly. Whoever built it didn't know how to compensate for galvanic corrosion or pressure flex. It was a ticking clock." "Thanks," Linda said, though the words tasted hollow. The call confirmed what she already knew. The sub was built with skill, but not mastery, driven by desperation and a lack of resources, not precision. She hung up and turned back to read. "They made it fast. Probably thought it just had to work once." "Almost did," Reed said. For a moment, neither spoke. The room hummed around them. Printers, HVAC vents, the low murmur of distant phone calls. Life continued, oblivious to the wreckage of two nameless lives quietly disintegrating in the evidence freezer. Reed picked up the wallet bag. "I'll reach out to the Miami PD, see if they can help trace any relatives. You do the state foster check." Linda nodded. "We keep following the trail as long as it goes." By late afternoon, the dead heat had dulled into a gray haze. Linda made her way to the Juvenile and Family Services Department 2 floors down. A social worker named Bethany Miller met her at a cubicle divided by faded photos of other children who had become case files and questions. Linda handed over a copy of the Delgado brothers' information. Michael Delgado had a daughter. Emily, she would have been about 8 when he disappeared. Bethany searched the name in the database and frowned. There's one Emily Delgado born 2010, placed into temporary care after her father went missing. No record of the mother. Where is she now? Bethany scrolled. Transferred to an aunt in Hialeah around 2019. No further entries. Either the guardianship held, or she aged out. Linda let out a slow breath. A thread, fragile but real. "Can I get the address?" "It's outdated," Bethany said, "but it's a start." "I'll print it." When Linda returned to her desk, the office was quieter. Reed had left a note on her keyboard. DEA fax came in. Name we suspected is on their radar. Ricardo Moreno. Mid-level operator, Miami/Tampa. Went to ground 3 years ago. Might be connected. More tomorrow. To Linda set the note aside and reviewed her own findings, typing them into her running report. She kept the language spare. Intake valve failure consistent with improper construction. Primary cause of loss of oxygen. Vessel not designed for sustained operation. She paused before adding the next line. Michael and Anthony Delgado recruited for submersible construction. Family circumstances suggest financial duress. Daughter, Emily Delgado. Current location pending. She saved the document. The sun slid behind a bank of clouds, casting the office in a soft amber reprieve. Linda stood and stretched. The silence pressed in, not oppressive, but expectant. She gathered her things, including the evidence box. As she headed for the exit, she paused just long enough to tap the photograph bag with 2 fingers. "We're getting there," she said softly. Outside, the sky was a restless gradient, blue giving way to tangerine and then to the slow hush of evening. She got into her car, turned the key, and let the air conditioner revitalize her lungs. Something had begun. Not just an investigation, not just a manhunt for a ghost-like smuggler, but a reckoning, a restoration of a story that had slipped between the lines of legality and into the realm of tragedy. She drove home under a darkening sky. A new address lay on her passenger seat. A girl's name was written in her notes. Tomorrow she would go looking, and the past, unburied and patient, would finally start to answer. The address from Family Services sat in the passenger seat like a fragile promise. By mid-morning, Miami had already turned its sidewalks into griddles, and heat rose off sunstruck concrete in slow, wavering breaths. Linda and Reed drove in a quiet that felt deliberate, the kind investigators keep when the next conversation could tilt a story in or out of focus. Hialeah announced itself with flaking stucco, chain-link fences stitched with bougainvillea, and the mixed music of a neighborhood that never really slept. The building at the listed address sagged the way old buildings do when they have heard too many arguments and too few apologies. A faded sign over the mailboxes declared Alvarez Apartments in hand-painted cursive, as if optimism might hold plaster together. They buzzed the manager's office and waited, sweat prickling beneath their collars. A woman in her 60s opened the door with a ring of keys bristling in her hand. Her hair was pulled into a tight bun, and worry lines framed eyes that had cataloged every tenant's good day and bad month. "Mrs. Alvarez?" Linda asked, showing her badge. "Officer Clark, Florida Wildlife Service." "This is Sergeant Reed. Wildlife?" Mrs. Alvarez frowned, then softened. "You must be here about people, not animals." "About both, maybe," Reed said. "We're looking for information on 2 former tenants. Michael and Anthony Delgado." At the names, her face changed. Not surprise, recognition, deep and immediate. She stepped aside and gestured them into a small office cooled by a fan valiantly losing a fight. Plastic folders leaned like exhausted soldiers along a shelf. "They were good boys," she said, sitting. "Paid late, but they always paid. After their mother died, everything fell apart." She rifled through a file drawer with the efficiency of habit and pulled a manila folder thin enough to be a rumor. "I filed a missing person form when they didn't come to get their things." Nobody followed up. "We saw it," Linda said. "Thank you for doing that." Mrs. Alvarez's mouth pressed into a line that wasn't quite a smile. Not enough, apparently. She flipped the folder open. Inside, a copy of the lease, a list of overdue charges written in a neat, regretful hand, a Polaroid of the brothers standing in the doorway with a toolbox at their feet, as if the camera had caught them mid-promise. "Michael had a little girl," she added, softer. "Emily. Sweet child. Quiet. He carried her picture like it was a saint." Linda's breath hitched in a place she tried to keep professional. "Do you know where Emily went?" "An aunt took her." Mrs. Alvarez said after a moment's search through memory. Rosa, Delgado as well, on 17th Avenue, small house with an orange tree that refuses to die. I can't promise she's still there. It's a start, Reed said, accepting the scribbled cross streets. As they stood to go, Mrs. Alvarez touched the edge of the folder with 2 fingers. If you find them, she said, then caught herself. If you found out anything, tell that girl the truth. People deserve better than rumors. We will, Linda said. It felt like a vow she could keep. The aunt's neighborhood sat a few miles away, where yards remembered to be yards, and sidewalk grass insisted on growing through anything. The house was modest and weary, a place that had met each month with stubbornness and grocery lists. An orange tree leaned over the fence, leaves glossy, fruit small and brave. A woman opened the door at their knock. Early 50s, maybe. Strong hands. Grief that had learned to sit down and let life pass by it. Rosa Delgado, she said before they asked. You're here about my nephews. Linda nodded. We found something connected to them. May we come in? The living room smelled of fried onions and laundry soap. Family photos tiled one wall, birthday cakes, church dresses, faces attempting joy. No recent pictures of a man who looked like Michael, but the absence felt intentional. Rosa sat without inviting them to. Linda and Reed took the couch, springs sighing under their weight. Tell me, Rosa said simply. Linda described the discovery carefully. She did not say Everglades like a headline. She said it like a place with its own gravity. She did not say submarine like a spectacle. She said vessel, home-built, a thing that wanted to be useful and failed. She described the intake valve, the cracked seal, the note. When she finished, Rosa held herself very still, like someone balancing a full glass to keep it from spilling. We thought they ran, she said finally, or were taken. We never knew. Michael, he always tried to fix what was broken, cars, boats, people, bills. She gave a hand gesture that served for all of it. After their mother got sick, the debt piled up. He would not let Emily go hungry. I told him pride doesn't buy milk, but pride is loud. Did he ever mention someone named Ricardo? Reed asked. Ricardo Moreno? Rosa's eyes flashed with a complicated recognition, the relief of a name finally spoken out loud mixed with the pain of having to hear it again. He said Ricardo once, a man with a job. Quick money, one time, he told me. I told him there is no such thing as one time. She stared at her hands. He didn't listen. He kept saying, 2 months, Tia. I can do anything in 2 months. Did you meet Ricardo? Linda asked. No, just a car that never parked, a voice that never came inside. Rosa looked up. I told Michael, if you can build it, they can bury you in it. I was right, wasn't I? Linda couldn't answer that without breaking her own breath. She reached for her bag and pulled out a sealed evidence sleeve. Inside, the water-paled note rested like a thin bone. This was with Michael, she said gently. I can't release the original yet, but you should read what it says. Rosa read, lips moving with each smudged word, then pressed the sleeve to her chest as if heat could re-ink the letters. Emily should see this, she whispered, but she does not live here anymore. Do you know where she is? Linda asked. Rosa nodded toward a framed photo on the shelf. Emily at 9, hair in pigtails, grin angled like sunlight. She stayed with me 2 years. Then the state moved her when my hours got cut, and I couldn't keep up with the visits and the forms. I fought. I lost. Last I heard, she was placed outside Tampa. Linda felt frustration rise, sharp and useless. Systems made for safety often flatten the people inside them. "We'll follow that trail," she said. "If it's all right, when we find her, may we tell her what happened? May we bring her—" She glanced at the sleeve. "This." "Please," Rosa said. "I want the truth to live somewhere besides my kitchen." They spoke another hour in the language of families who never expected to meet police. Rosa offered details that didn't sound like clues but were. The brothers rebuilding a small fishing engine in the yard with borrowed tools. Michael counting bills twice because once wasn't to be trusted. Anthony laughing at a carburetor that refused to apologize. A life seen through chores and errands, ordinary, which made the ending hurt more.
Before they left, Linda asked, "Do you have anything of Michael's we should see? Letters, notes, anything about this job?" Rosa went to a hallway closet and returned with a shoebox softened by time. Inside were photographs, receipts, an old mechanic's license, and a few letters written in the blunt, big handwriting of a man who needed words to work quickly. Linda read one dated 6 weeks before the brothers disappeared. "Rosa, it's long hours. If this works, Emily won't have to choose between shoes and school. It's dangerous, but I don't see another door. Tell me if you do. M." Linda placed the letter back as if the cardboard might splinter. "Thank you," she said. "You've given us more than you know." At the door, Rosa paused. "If you find the man who asked them to do this, if he is still breathing, tell him Rosa Delgado said there is no such thing as one time." "We will," Reed said, and his voice held a sternness Linda rarely heard. Outside, the heat had matured into thunderheads piling like slow mountains to the west. They stood by the car a moment, letting the air move around their thoughts. "Moreno," Reed said, almost to himself. "Our phantom finally has an echo." "And Emily," Linda added. "A line that leads somewhere new." They drove back through streets glazed with afternoon light, past kids racing bikes that squealed in protest, past storefronts selling answers to different kinds of problems. In the passenger seat, Linda held the copied letters like they might drift away if she loosened her grip. At the station, the rhythm of air conditioning and fluorescent hum folded around them. Linda scanned the letters for the record, logged Rosa's account, and added a new section to her report. Family interviews indicate recruitment by Ricardo Moreno for construction/piloting of submersible. Financial duress evident. Emily Delgado relocated from aunt's care, placement search ongoing. She stopped, then typed another sentence that wasn't about chain of custody, yet felt essential. The brothers attempted a solution built from skill and scarcity. The failure that killed them was mechanical, not moral. She didn't know if that belonged in a report. She left it there anyway. Reed appeared in her doorway with a file fresh from a fax machine that never slept. DEA confirms Moreno vanished after a raid 2 years ago. Odds are he's dead or living under a new name. That's not the end, Linda said. Someone supplied the design. Money. Parts. Moreno wasn't an engineer. Then we climb, Reed replied, tapping the file. But first, let's find the girl. They worked until the windows turned into purple mirrors. The last calls to county offices went to voicemail. The last emails to Tampa bounced cheerful auto-replies. The last note Linda wrote to herself read, "Emily, follow up first thing." When she finally packed up, the building felt like a hollow shell of its daytime self. She lifted the evidence box, hesitated, and pulled the sealed copy of the note back out. For a second she imagined a girl opening a door and reading words that should have come from a living voice. The thought tightened something under her ribs, then loosened it with purpose. Outside, the sky cracked open and rain fell in sudden sheets, warm and relentless. Linda walked to her car through it, soaked and unbothered, as if the day needed washing and she volunteered to help. On the drive home, wipers thumped a steady metronome. Traffic slowed to a procession of cautious decisions. Back at her apartment, she set the letters and the copied note on the table, then sat without turning on a light. Through the window, the storm softened to a hiss. She thought about Rosa's kitchen, about Mrs. Alvarez's thin folder, about a man who believed 2 months could hold a future. She thought about a girl whose smile had once been an anchor small enough to fit in a wallet. Morning would bring more calls, more corridors of policy to navigate, more names to test against databases that never remembered anyone the way family did. But tonight, the story was at least pointed toward daylight, toward a house with an orange tree and a truth that was finally being told out loud. Linda closed her eyes and let the rain finish its sentence. Tomorrow, she would go looking again. And this time, she carried words meant for a daughter. The morning broke soft and reluctant, as if unsure it wanted to expose what the day might bring. Tampa was already stirring when Linda Clark pulled onto the interstate, the sky still nursing the last gray-blue threads of dawn. In her passenger seat rested a manila folder, inside, a form from Family Services linking them to a name, a school, a new placement. Emily Delgado. Age 14. Current address, Tampa, Hillsborough County. Linda's grip on the wheel tightened as she drove. The farther she got from Miami, the more aware she became of the story that trailed her like a hesitant shadow, a story of 2 brothers, a failed vessel, and a girl who deserved to know the kind of love that had survived beneath the water. Sergeant Reed followed in a separate vehicle. They'd agreed that it was better to make the approach with care, 2 officers, but only one conversation at a time. The plan was simple: find Emily, deliver what they had found, and answer only the questions she asked. No speculation. No softening of the truth beyond what was necessary for a young heart to carry. The address led them to a quiet block of suburban Tampa. A single-story home with a small front porch. A faded basketball hoop drooped over the driveway. Azalea bushes struggled against the heat along the front windows. Nothing about the place hinted at the story they carried, and yet, it held its breath, as all places do when the past begins to circle back. "You ready?" Reed asked, stepping up beside her. "No," Linda said honestly. "But she doesn't need perfect. She just needs true." They rang the bell, and after a moment, the door opened. Emily Delgado stood before them, not the little girl from the photo, but a young woman marked by the shapes her life had forced her into. Her dark hair was longer now, pulled into a loose braid. Her eyes were cautious, older than 14, but unmistakably her father's. "Yes," she said, voice flat with practiced reserve. "Emily," Linda began gently. She showed her badge, though it felt out of place. "My name is Linda Clark. This is Sergeant Reed. We're here because we knew your father." The change was instantaneous and devastating, a flicker of confusion, followed by a shuddered tension. Emily's hand went rigid on the doorknob. "My father's dead," she said, and whether it came out as a question or fact was impossible to tell. Linda nodded. "I know," she said softly. "We found him." Emily blinked, once, twice. Not shocked, exactly, more like someone who'd learned to collect stories in pieces and was terrified of which ones would arrive unfinished again. "My foster mom's not here," Emily said after a moment. She hesitated, then opened the door wider. "You can come in." The living room was neat but lived in. Schoolbooks sat in a pile near the couch, beside a plate with crumbs from what had likely been an early breakfast. A wall calendar marked off days in tiny, tired XS. Emily sat on the edge of an armchair while Linda and Reed took the couch. The distance between them felt too large and terribly precise. "We found something of your father's," Linda said, setting the manila envelope on the coffee table. "Something he wanted you to have." Emily looked at the folder like it might split open and rewrite her world. "You said you found him," she said. "Where?" "In the Everglades," Reed answered. He was in a vessel. A small submarine. It wasn't built to last. And he wasn't alone, Linda added. Your Uncle Anthony was there, too. Emily's jaw clenched. I don't remember him. He helped raise you, Linda said. Back when you lived in Miami. Before things got hard. Emily's eyes flicked from Linda to Reed and back. Why were they in a submarine? She asked, voice cracking halfway. They were trying to move something they shouldn't have, Reed said carefully. Drugs. But your father, he didn't come from that world. Neither did your uncle. They were mechanics. They built things. And someone took advantage of that. He was trying to get money, Linda said, her voice as soft as the truth would allow. To take care of you. But the job failed. Something broke. They didn't make it out. Silence settled between them, laden with the weight of comprehension and the ache of impossible corrections. Emily stared at her hands. I always thought he left, she whispered. That he didn't want me anymore. Linda reached slowly into the envelope and withdrew the sealed note. He didn't leave you, Emily, she said. He held on to this until his last moment. It was found with him. Emily took the sealed sleeve with trembling fingers. For a moment she didn't open it, just pressed it against her forehead like a prayer someone had been keeping safe for her. Then she read. The room stayed utterly still except for the sound of a single breath catching in a throat made too young for final goodbyes. Emily finished the note and closed her eyes. He loved me, she said, and the words didn't weep, they breathed. He did, Linda said. More than anything. They stayed a few moments longer. Reed passed along information about the investigation, sparing Emily the parts that still stank of cartel whispers and broken machinery. Linda gave her a copy of the photograph they'd recovered, her younger self, smiling into sunlight, held against decades of rust and water. Before they left, Emily stood. Thank you, she said, not raw or forced, but whole. For finding him. For finding me. Linda almost replied with something official, or kind, or procedural. Instead, she said only, we'll make sure they're remembered right. They drove back in silence, each turning inward. The case was not closed, but a circle had finally met itself. The sub would be studied, the cocaine processed into evidence, Ricardo Moreno filed into history's shadow. There were bigger forces to hunt, yes. But sometimes the justice that mattered most was quieter, sharper, unabbreviated by paperwork. Back at the office, Linda finished her report in full. She added the dates, the field notes, the mechanical failures, but also, in the final paragraph, something else. The Delgados were not masterminds, but men who tried to hold their world together with tools they trusted. They died not from greed, but from the force of a hope too heavy for steel. The daughter they left behind has been notified, and their story lives where it was meant to, in the heart of someone who loved them. She signed her name and sat a long time with her hand resting on the paper, as if to help the ink dry with the warmth that language couldn't provide. Evening came, casting the Everglades in molten gold. Reed found her by the window, staring into a place far beyond what she could see. Planning to take up poetry, he asked warmly. I think I already did, Linda replied. They stood together, not speaking, while the quiet hum of the building softened the edges of the day. Somewhere, a girl turned a page in her life and found her father there. Somewhere, a rust-ravaged sub cooled in evidence storage, its purpose finished, its ghosts at rest. And somewhere, deep in the heart of Florida's wildest silence, the swamp settled back into itself, ready to keep its other secrets, until someone cared enough to lift them back into the light.